Hi, everybody. It's Mary Kelly, and thank you so much for joining me today on 7 steps to leading through the virus crisis for practice managers. And I'm super grateful for Jody for setting this up for us. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about how to get through this crisis we all seem to be in because of something none of us had ever heard of or seen because it really didn't exist just a few months ago. So what I want to talk to you today about is how can we as practice managers and medical professionals best lead our teams through this crisis. Now, it's paradoxical to me that at a time when we most need medical professionals to show up to work, take care of patients, and fight this disease and fight this enemy that we are all now spending a lot of resources on and worried about, that some practices are suffering because they don't have enough business because they're considered elective. So I just want to address this for just a second. I think it's going to be really tough for especially those groups because they're kind of been put on hold for months, a few months, it could be 6 months, we just don't know, until the absolute crisis has passed. Now, because of this, some hospitals, some practices, some clinics have had to furlough medical personnel. And again, it seems just so paradoxical that we're having to have this situation. But some of the clinics I've been working with and some of the practices, because they're not allowed to have what's considered elective surgery, even for some of those things that are, well, a little bit dire and necessary, are being postponed as long as they possibly can or until they get to an emergent situation. Now, we all know that's not optimal. And the reason for that, again, is because maybe the patient is getting more sick, more ill, the consequences of waiting are getting worse. And this is desperately a crisis that we have to manage, again, as practice managers. And we as leaders have to make great decision. We also, as leaders, in whatever level we're in, we have to get people to take the right action at the right time with the right information and with the right spirit every time. And that, frankly, is hard. And this is what we need from our leaders today, is to get others around us to take the right action. Now, how do we best lead through a crisis? And I just wanted to share with you that I was in charge of people during 9/11, and what was hard for me were my civilian friends' reactions, because most of them were told to stay home. They were glued to their television set. They were paralyzed into inactivity. And I felt really sorry for them because they did not have a plan. They didn't know what to do next. And they were struggling with feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, not feeling as though they're in control of their own destiny, their job. The world seemed to be very chaotic, and it was. How do we as leaders help people through these times, which are very, very difficult? Now, first, we acknowledge the problem. And for some medical professionals, they don't want to be at work right now during this situation. They would rather be almost anywhere else. And I completely understand that. And certainly if they are at high risk and their job calls for them to be at work, this may be a very, very difficult time. Do you put yourself in harm's way to care for patients you've spent your whole life being educated and focused on caring for, but now it might come at the risk of infecting your family or carrying this virus, or some of you have to worry about trying to care for your parents at the same time. There's a lot of factors to consider. So first, we have to acknowledge the problem. And as one of my friends in the medical world pointed out, because we're talking about the numbers, that this is different, because it does seem to spread faster than, say, the flu or the common cold. And unlike cancer or malaria, it just does not seem to be as able to be contained as other things. So the contagion aspect of this problem for many people is huge. We have to acknowledge the problem, but we also have to acknowledge how people are feeling about that problem. And that is a critical issue. So make sure that you, as one of the people in charge, even if you don't think you're in charge of that many people, make sure you understand the real issue and the true nature of the crisis. And that's on a very personal level with your people. What is their crisis? What's worrying them? What are they really concerned about? Is it because they've got a toddler at home? Is it because they've got parents like mine who are in their late 80s and we're worried desperately about, are they going to be okay by themselves? If I can't be there, will somebody else be able to be taking care of them? Is there something they need? And all of those things is part of the problem that is causing people stress, overwhelm, concern, and it is making people more myopic. Now, as leaders, one of the steps we take, one of the things we teach is we ask what if questions and we get factual answers. So again, what we do is we take the worst possible case scenario, and I've got a handout that will go with this that you can access. That is, what's the very worst case scenario? And then we say, okay, if that were to happen, what would we do? And then we write down the action steps, very specific things. Action steps, remember, are things you can cross off your list. For many people, they make a New Year's resolution, and I say, what's your action step on your New Year's resolution? Let's say you want to, lose 10 pounds, which lots of people say. I don't know about you. I've been trying to lose the same 10 pounds for decades. But let's say I'm going to really do it this time. An action step, well, I can eat healthier. That's a terrible action step because it can't be crossed off. The fact that I made the decision to eat the carrots instead of the Frosted Flakes or the Lucky Charms, okay, that's probably a choice, but did I write that down as an action step? No. An action step is eat a salad every day. That you can cross off your list. Drink your 16 ounces of water every single day, 7 times a day. You can cross those off your list. Action steps are things we can cross off the list. So figure out the worst case scenario, what your plan would be to handle that, and then what your action steps would be. And then look at the best case scenario and say, okay, if these numbers were wrong, if the social distancing works, if people stayed home, if we didn't have this contagion spread into our facility, what would be the best case scenario? And then work backwards from there. And then in between those, between that worst case scenario and the best case scenario, that's probably the most likely scenario. So take a look at where that most likely scenario is. I always err on the side of caution, and I'm always kind of a worst case scenario prepper. And that's partly why I'm not one of those people who ran to the store to get toilet paper. Also because I have a year's supply of baby wipes. I've never had a baby, and I have a year's supply of baby wipes. I don't know why. But I do, by the way, want to just mention, I'm not sure where people got the masks. I'm in Colorado coming to you with this webinar, and our governor said, if you're going to go out in public, wear a mask. I missed that memo as an adult. Where was I supposed to get a mask? If you're not in the medical profession, if you're me and you just work with some medical people, it's not like I go to a hospital and rip off masks on the way out. I don't know if I was supposed to do that, but I don't have any masks. And then somebody said, well, you can always wear a bandana. I am neither Billy the Kid, and I was not planning to rob a bank. So I do not own a bandana either. And then people sent me helpful YouTube videos on how I could sew either a mask or a bandana. I did not do well in elementary school in arts and crafts, and so that's kind of out of the question. So I just have to tell you, I'm staying home. I have been home since the 8th of March. I'm not sure when all these restrictions are going to be lifted, but I'm just going to be home. I have no masks and I have no sewing skills. All right. So I err on the side of the worst case scenario. And then I work from there. And I again look at the possible courses of action, my potential outcomes, and then I talk to folks so everybody understands what's at stake. And this is where I think medical professionals could do a better job. They haven't really conveyed that, yes, our job is to save patients, our job is to care for patients, but there's also a business aspect to that. And the business aspect of caring for patients means that if we don't have patients, we don't have revenue, which means we don't have benefits, we don't have paychecks, we can't make payroll, and this is a business issue. So leadership has to be very clear to everyone what is actually at stake. Now, one of the ways you can do this is with my 5-minute brainstorming plan. You all know me well enough to know I love checklists, tools, templates, and things that we can plug into other solutions. I always ask that question, has anybody ever done something like this before? If so, what could we learn from it? What could we use? And this is part of one of I've got a few 5-minute plans included in this program. And one is this 5-minute brainstorming plan, because we know that the solutions are often there. We may have to develop the solutions, but we've got to figure out the problem and then identify the solutions. And great leaders know that our employees, our staff, our suppliers, our customers, our patients, everyone has a unique insight. And we know that people have to feel as though they've got a voice in the organization in order to move through the crisis. So part of the brainstorming plan is to get ideas, but I need to tell you, part of the brainstorming plan is also so that people feel heard. And guess what? They may have something that you haven't thought of. So to make an effective brainstorming session, in the olden days, and by that I mean 3 months ago, we would have gotten together maybe around a conference table or in a group, and we would have thrown out questions and then gone really quickly, hey, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And again, when you do that, make sure you as the leader talk last and use those points to make your brainstorming effort effective. And when we say effective, you can do it online. You can throw out questions in the chat box we can use. We can say, hey, what's your solution on this? Or have you thought about this? But leaders need to speak last, because otherwise your team members or people who look up to you will sit there and go, oh, okay. And they'll nod their head like little bobblehead dolls. And all they're saying is, you must be smarter than me. You must know more than me. Therefore, I'm just going to take your opinion and I'm not going to share with you my thoughts or ideas. That's not what you want. What you want are people who will share their thoughts and ideas, because again, we can only think about the things that go through our own filter. We need other people's thoughts and other people's biases, assumptions, and their filters to get us out of our own head so that we can look for new and more effective solutions. Now, because of that, as I said, leaders need to speak last, and we need to make sure everyone gets heard, every single person. And this is one of my concerns with having meetings online, on video teleconferencing, because some people will just turn on their mute button and they will stay muted and they will listen to everybody else. But maybe inside they want to say something, they're just not sure when the time is right. Maybe they're frustrated. Maybe they just want to vent. And this is something that, again, is much more difficult when I can't see people's eyes, when I can't see their emotions, when I can't look at their body language, I can't see what's going on inside their head all the time. And it's more difficult by video teleconferencing. So those people who are not vocal on those calls, we might need to reach out to them separately, make that phone call, pick up the phone and say, hey, I know you're on the call and maybe you're really busy. And goodness knows, a lot of people right now are busy at home. They're trying to work from home. They're trying to do calls at home. They're trying to, maintain communication with work at home. And they might be also homeschooling. And maybe they've also got a spouse or a partner who's working from home as well. And now all of a sudden, there's 2 computers in the house for 7 people. Everybody needs bandwidth. Everybody is looking for computer time. Everybody's trying to get things accomplished. The internet goes out. If you're me, last week, you not only had your internet go out, you also had your gas lines cut and a water main break. That was down the street, so that was fun. Now, I'm not complaining. Again, these are first world problems, and if we're going to be isolated, we are in a perfect place to do this, and I'm very, very grateful. But it is also very difficult to maintain that sense of what's going on when you can't see people face to face. As leaders, we have to reach out more. Now, agree to be open and inclusive. We've all been to places where they say, we're all going to agree that there's no dumb ideas. Folks, there are dumb ideas. And there's a reason why some ideas are not implemented. But we want to hear all the ideas. And something that may have been a stupid idea 6 months ago, all of a sudden makes sense. Well, right now, there's some major shifts in some of my organizations where my business people are saying, you know what? 59% of Americans right now who are working from home say, wow, I like working from home. I like not having a 2-hour commute. I like not having to spend extra money on dry cleaning and buying lunches out. How do we continue to do this? Where 6 months ago, this wasn't even a consideration. So we have to agree that right now, in a crisis situation, there are no dumb ideas. We've got to be creative, we've got to be clever, and we have to innovate. And we do this by asking questions that are focused on particular areas for very relevant ideas. Just saying, hey, what should we do better? That's not good enough. It's kind of like the boss walking around the workplace and saying, hey, how's your day? And everybody says the same things. Good, fine, great, wonderful. None of that is helpful. We have to ask specific questions that will generate specific answers. So if we ask overly general questions like, how can we improve the customer or the patient experience? We should not be surprised when we don't get great answers. Instead, We have to ask questions that has enough specifics in it to generate those really interesting thoughts. So for example, even though we say think outside the box, our brains like to think inside the box. So if I asked you, name everything on the planet that's green, you'd say grass, trees, and then you'd hesitate and say maybe some cars, but it's so broad that your brain kind of struggles with the answer. It's too broad. What we need are specifics. If instead I said, open your refrigerator and tell me everything inside your refrigerator that's green, you'd say, oh, cucumbers and lettuce and cabbage and pickle relish and that weird cheese that always turns green really quickly. Specificity creates relevance. So as you're doing this, please create that with your teams and ask questions. Now you can do this by using Post-it notes or index cards. People can do them from their desk at home. You can do it in meetings and you can hold them up to the camera. People can use the whiteboard feature in your video teleconferencing, but somehow you've got to have a way of capturing the meeting, having it transcribed and sharing the results with everybody, because that way people feel as though what they did mattered, that they weren't wasting their time. And again, you've heard me say this a few times. I love employee opinion surveys, but if you're not going to do anything with those opinions, and if you ask people questions, you know, how are things going around here? But you never change and you never act on that information, it's worse than never asking the question at all. Because then when you ask people a question, you're implying that you care about their answers. When you don't do anything with their answers, what you're doing is solidifying the fact that you don't care about them. And right now, during a time of crisis, this is what people will remember. They will remember how you cared for them during this crisis. So ask specific questions like, how can we improve the patient experience in our practices when they show up? Do we have a waiting period that is unnecessary? Do we have a comfortable space for them to be? Do we acknowledge them right away? Are we quick to meet their needs? Ask them if they'd like some water. Ask them if they'd like coffee. Do we keep on time? I was very recently one of those patients having an experience, and I thought it was going to be for about a 15-minute consult. And after I'd been waiting for 90 minutes, I said, so is the practitioner running behind? And they said, well, he often runs behind. I said, no, you don't understand. I've been here for an hour and a half and I got here 30 minutes early. So I've been here 2 hours, but a half an hour of that was mine. I get that. I'm always early. And they said, well, he routinely runs 2 to 3 hours late. And folks, I have to tell you, my head was about ready to explode. I said, but why? And they said, because he likes to really spend quality time with his patients. I said, wait a second. I said, he may be providing great care, but at the expense of people sitting in your waiting room for 2 to 3 hours. Do you really think that's the most effective scheduling? And they said, well, when he's ready to see patients, we've got to have the patients ready to see him. And I went, oh, wow. And I will tell you that as a practitioner, he was great, but I thought the patient experience was horrible. So it's not my intention to return to that particular practice. Now, I am not saying that what they're doing was bad. It's worked for them up until now. But when you think about the fact that patients do have choices, how they're being treated, and especially now during a crisis. So right now, if you've got patients who have had their procedures being delayed, like right now, as I said, my podiatrists are not doing bunion surgeries because they're not considered critical. Well, guess what? If you're that patient who's suffering with bunions and it's painful for you to walk each and every day, this is a critical thing for you. Have we reached out to those people? What are we doing to help those people through this crisis? And if we've got a website or some kind of online service or online social media, how are we improving our patient experience? As my friend Gina Schreck says, and she was a social media goddess way before social media was cool. She says, if you're going to have an online presence, whether it's a website or social media, a Facebook page, LinkedIn, whatever you have, be educational, be informative, and be a little bit entertaining. And so that's kind of what your patients want from you. They would love for you to educate them on what they need to know, be informative. And if you can do it in a way that, shows that you've got some personality, that's fantastic. Now, how can we improve the experience when a patient calls us? Do we put them into a voicemail maze that causes them to curse at us before we've even answered the phone? And some of our organizations do that. and partly because right now our email systems are sometimes routing calls to people working at home because we want to be very responsive. But is there a just in case number? Is there an emergency number? And I have to tell you that my personal dentist, they're only open Monday through Thursday, which makes me insane. But the reason I keep them, because I don't know why I think to call my dentist on Fridays. I don't know why, but they do say, if this is a patient emergency or you really need to talk to the doctor, here's his personal cell phone. And I love that. Now, I've never used it, but I like the idea that if I had a situation where I had something that could be a dental emergency and I wasn't sure if it was, I could call him and he would answer my phone call. So how do we improve the experience when patients call us? And do we return phone calls? Do we have a system in place that makes sure that we do this? And if we can't get to them, we call them until we do. How can we provide training for our current and emerging staff leaders? So folks, right now, I know training is the furthest thing from your mind, but during a time of crisis, guess what? This is when you need to take note of the people who are stepping into those leadership positions and the people who are not. Now, some people are simply circling the wagons, protecting themselves, worried very myopically about what's happening with their own situation, and they're not looking at the practice, the hospital, or even the patients. And it's a natural reaction. But your real leaders are those people who are stepping up, offering to do anything they can, even if, they say, you know what, I can't do all of these things, but I can do this. Take note of the people who are stepping up, and then look at which one of those people, which ones of those folks are you going to be paying more attention to in the future to groom for more leadership later. Now, what types of patients are we going to serve in 5 to 10 years? What will they need to be? What will we need to be doing differently than today? I will tell you that when my pharmacy prescriptions started being filled online, all I could think about was my parents. I thought, there is no way they can navigate an online script fulfillment. And yet they've somehow managed to do it. And I didn't think they would be able to. Will telemedicine be possible? Well, for some of you, like my anesthesiologist, no, we don't want you doing telemedicine with anesthesia. That's just not a good idea. But for some things, this crisis has prompted some folks to implement telemedicine. And in some cases, it's also caused us to lift restrictions that were in place before that maybe, frankly, we didn't need. They said, we can't communicate with people over video teleconferencing. How do we know it's the real patient? Well, when I send a fax, you don't know if it's the real patient. So some of those regulations and restrictions might be lifted because of this crisis. So one of the things you can ask your staff is, what is getting in the way right now of us not being as responsive as we'd like to be for our patients? And is now an opportunity for us to change that and get even better. Now, capture those ideas. Do not let these ideas go away, because it's in the moment of crisis and rapid change and rapid transition that our brain, by the way, generates great ideas. When pushed, our brain goes, oh yeah, let's look for solutions. And it does that. So number 3, you are the voice of calm. So you're going to calmly figure out your strategy with your team. So you've acknowledged the problem, you've solicited input, you've got great ideas, and now you're going to figure out your strategy. So you've figured out what you need to do. Again, look at your policies. Do your policies make sense? Because some of the policies you had in the past were good enough, but now you're in a different situation. And this situation might continue for 2 months, 6 months, a year, 18 months. We just don't know. But if they were bad policies, now is a good time to review those and get rid of those. And again, like I said before, we also sometimes look at, has somebody else already had this situation happen? Has somebody worked through this? Is there somebody we could talk to, or is there a template or a guide we can use? Now, we would all agree that we have never experienced a pandemic of this level ever. The Spanish flu from 1918 to 1919 was pretty much gone by the 1920s, the Roaring 20s, partly because people did not travel as much. When we implemented the social, I say we like I was there, I'm not that old, I'm a little old. My birthday is coming up, but I'm not that old. In Philadelphia, they did not worry about social distancing and isolation. In St. Louis, they learned from Philadelphia back during the Spanish flu of 1918 and 1919, and they told people to stay home, please. And that worked. So we look at the past and we say, okay, that might work for now. We're not exactly sure, but we'll take little wins. We'll take those victories and hopefully save lives in the process. Now, number 4, keep everyone informed. And this is hard. Partly because you think that when you're telling people something, they're getting it the first time. In an emergency situation, people do not get it the first time. They need more communication from you, and you need to provide information as soon as it's available. People crave information during times of uncertainty, and they want reassuring information. Now, that doesn't mean they can't handle bad news. They can handle bad news. They can take it. What they can't handle is uncertainty, not knowing whether or not you're working on the problem, not knowing whether or not you know about the problem, not knowing is an enemy of productivity. So they want to know that you, their leader, even if you're the manager, the supervisor, know what's going on and that you have a plan to handle whatever happens. Or if you don't have a current plan, you're at least talking to other smart people who might have a plan and you are able to support that. And so again, you've got to support and protect your people during any kind of change, transition, and crisis, and give everyone great information as soon as possible, and repeat the information. If it's important, repeat the information. People are not getting it the first time, and again, they're thinking about themselves, which is why many organizations, especially in the military, we have a crisis communication action plan, because we know you have to communicate more than you think you do. And ideally, you've got a way to communicate now that is still in place right now, not like 9/11 where we weren't able to make phone calls, we couldn't get hold of people, we didn't know if people were okay. So that's a kind of crisis communication plan that needs to be implemented ahead of time. And people need to know how to access those if the normal means of communication are simply not available. And people need to know where to go to learn more information. They wake up in the middle of the night and they want to find something about their workplace. You want them to get that information from you, not from the media, not from someone who's trying to blow up bad news, not from a coworker who thinks they might know something. No, you are the expert. You are the trusted leader, and the information needs to come from you. So when you're providing this information, be specific, stick to the facts, be honest, and be timely. And right now, folks, my leaders are all going through this. It is very difficult to focus on the realities and the facts instead of giving way to the emotions, the opinions, and the assumptions. We as leaders have to make great decisions based on facts, based on the reality, based on, again, what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? The answer is probably somewhere in between, and that's where we're going to put together a plan that's going to address those specific outcomes with the actions we need to take in order to get there. So when you're communicating to your people or to external audiences, because our patients need to hear from you too, be specific, stick to the facts, be honest and be timely, and control your message. You as the professionals control the calm, you control the message, you control what people hear from you. And number 7, action trumps fear. We know that when we can take action, we are not scared. And this is why sometimes when I talk to older people about planning for the eventuality, it's not a question of if we're going to die, it's a question of when we're going to die. We're all going to die. But if we can take concrete steps that provide us with a certain level of control over that process, we're not so scared. It's still scary, but we're not so scared. So give your people tasks to keep them focused, and break up the tasks so that people can get small wins. Now, what does this look like? Well, I have a 5-minute plan for that, and it's the 5-minute goal setting plan. Many people get stuck into paralysis because they just don't know what that next step is to be successful. They just don't know what to do. So when you're giving people tasks, give them a specific goal and give them a completion date. Folks, we all work to deadlines. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure I wrote some papers the night before they were due. And some of my students, I'm going to say a lot of my students, wrote their papers the night before they were due. And I would say things like, you could start this earlier. And they say, oh, but Dr. Kelly, I do my best writing the night before. And I would say things like, but you do your only writing the night before. How would you know the difference? You could be better. We don't know. But people work to deadlines. It's just how our brains work. Give people shorter tasks, shorter goals, and help them with a completion date and a deadline. So when you give someone a task, have them reiterate back to you what they will do. Say, okay, now what are you going to do on this? And they say, this, that, whatever. Go, okay, so you're going to do what? And then they say, I will do this by this time. That's commitment. That helps their brain clarify the information, because right now there's lots of information coming at people from all kinds of places. You need to help them with priorities and provide clarity. Again, you are the calm. Now, keep in mind, everybody's going to have obstacles. Everybody's going to have challenges. So we need to identify those obstacles. And then once we identify the obstacles, our brain can come up with the solutions. And this is the magic thing about our brains. And those of you in neurology know this, that our brain loves to kind of noodle on things. That's why we have that phrase, I'm going to noodle on this. I'm going to think about this. Because our brain wants to think of possibilities. Now, once we think about the obstacles, we say, okay, here's an obstacle. What would be the solution? And again, you can practice that brainstorming with them. So that's going to be an obstacle. What do you think you can do to solve that problem? And then they say, oh, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could do this. You go, great. Let's focus on the solutions. And once people take notes of the solutions, that's what our brain likes to focus on. And that gets people out of that victim mentality, the feeling sorry for ourselves, the circle the wagon type sentiment that is really, really tough for a lot of people. So again, we need to give people action steps. So if they've got a goal, what are those 5 action steps they can take to break down that goal and make it a reality? And again, break things down into smaller chunks, and then provide a due date for that, so that people, first off, get that sense of achievement by crossing something off their list. Again, it's an action step, so it gets crossed off the list. And then they've got a due date, so it helps them schedule and prioritize their time. Because again, if people are working from home right now, or jumping back in between more people at home for more hours of the day, and they're still trying to get to work, this could be more difficult for them. So help people be successful by providing them with these steps. And then ask the question, how do we know when we're successful? And for many of us, we never take time to think about, wow, was I successful today? Was today a successful day? What would make today successful? And we have to identify that. We have to help people see that. So keep in mind, as a bonus, your calmness is contagious. Our SEAL teams talk about this too in the Navy, that we say calm is contagious. If you're the person in charge, you've got to think about what's the very worst that could happen, what's the very best, figure out the options, and then move forward. When you are calm, you provide other people with reassurance with your attitude and your action. And all of a sudden they think, you know what, we're going to be okay. And with all of this, we all will be okay. Eventually, it might take us a while, and it may take all of us working together, and that's not the worst thing. So remember, leaders respond to crises fast, ASAP, as soon as possible. We jump into action because we have to. And we do it because people are relying on us to jump into action. And because, well, for many of us, it's our job. And right now, it's a tough time to be a medical provider. But again, providing information right now is critical. If you sit on information, it's useless. The information's obsolete. Being timely and proactive enhances the trust your teams have with you, as well as the organization. And you need that. So our great leaders, we know we step up. We've got to control other people's reactions. We've got to settle people down when they get excited. At the same time, we have to manage their uncertainty. We have to acknowledge how they feel about things. We have to help them move through the process and the problem. And we have to address these things in a manner that instills confidence and trust. I'm really grateful you joined me today. There's some free stuff at productiveleaders.com. It's /free. My productivity sheets are there. Some of you have seen those before. The business plan is there. Some of the 5-minute plans are there. And then the kiwilive.com, that is how I push my documents out, and there's always changing things there. I'm doing another series of webinars that are free coming forward, and you can find out more information on that with the newsletter, the productiveleaders.com newsletter. And that this week also has an article for my medical people, and I hope you enjoy it. It's always my pleasure to spend some time with you. Right now, I've got a new book out called Who Comes Next? Leadership Succession Planning Made Easy. And I wrote this with Meredith Elliott Powell, and we focused on what we need to do in order to create the right leadership at all levels of an organization for times of change and transition. Does it sound familiar? So we hope it is relevant right now. We've spent a couple years doing the research on this and putting this together. And I'm just so excited to be able to share some of those insights with you today. Please, 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 if you are feeling sad or down, or you just want to bounce some ideas off someone and you're not sure who to call, these are my phone numbers. Folks, you know that I have been working with MGMAs and medical practices and hospitals for years and years and years, and it's truly my honor. So if I can help you, please just pick up the phone and call me. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so, so much for joining me. I am beyond honored that you would spend this time, and have a great day.